In the faraway future, a time when old empires had fallen and new kingdoms rose from their ruins, there was a land called Veron. This place was harsh and unforgiving, filled with deserts of black sand, mountains that scraped the skies, and cities built out of steel and glass. Among these lands stood King Harold, a ruler both feared and respected by his people. His name carried weight because he had fought many battles to keep his kingdom safe. But even though he ruled with strength, whispers of rebellion began to spread like wildfire. Some of his subjects thought he cared too much about power and not enough about them. King Harold knew about the rumors. He wasn't blind or deaf. Every night, as he sat alone in his grand hall, he could hear the faint murmurs of discontent coming from beyond the castle walls. It troubled him deeply. He didn't want to be seen as just another tyrant who crushed anyone who dared oppose. He wanted loyalty, not out of fear, but out of love. And so, after days of thinking and nights of restless pacing, Harold came up with a plan. A bold, risky plan that might either save his reign or destroy it completely. On a cold morning, when the sun was still low in the sky, Harold summoned one of his most trusted warriors to the throne room. Her name was Clara Bennett. She was known throughout the kingdom for her skill in battle. Many said she could defeat 10 men without breaking a sweat. Others claimed she never showed mercy, that her heart was as cold as the metal of her sword. But those who truly knew her understood that Clara's toughness came from years of hardship. She had lost her family in the wars that tore apart the old world. And since then, she had dedicated her life to protecting others no matter what. It cost her. When Clara entered the throne room, she walked with the confidence of someone who had earned her place. The guards, standing at attention, saluted her as she passed, their faces full of respect. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the large windows letting in only slivers of light. At the center sat King Harold on his massive throne, his golden crown glinting faintly under the shadows. His expression was unreadable, which made Clara uneasy. Usually when the king called for her, it meant trouble. Wars, assassins, sieges, those were the kinds of things she dealt with. But this felt different. Clara, Harold said, his deep voice echoing through the vast space. "Come closer," obeyed, stopping a few feet away from the steps leading. "Up to the throne? You called for me, your majesty?" she asked, bowing slightly. Her tone was polite, but firm. She didn't waste words, and neither did he. "I have a task for you," Harold continued, leaning forward slightly. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. "Tomorrow, during the public duel in the arena, I want you to humiliate me." For a moment, Clara thought she hadn't heard him correctly. Humiliate him. That didn't make sense. Why would the king ask such a thing? Surely it must be some kind of test or worse, a trap. She frowned, trying to read his expression, but it gave nothing away. "I don't understand, my lord," she said finally. "Why would you want me to do that?" Harold sighed, leaning back against his throne. He looked older than usual, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders heavier. "My people are losing faith in me," he admitted. "They see me as untouchable, unbreakable. They think I'm too proud to admit weakness. But if they see me humbled, brought down to their level, maybe they'll remember that I'm human too." Clara listened carefully, her mind racing. On one hand, she understood what he was trying to do. Leaders often needed to show humility to gain trust. On the other hand, this was dangerous. If word got out that the duel was staged, it could ruin everything. People would call him weak, a coward. And as for her, well, humiliating the king wasn't exactly something that would endear her to the courtiers or the army. Still, she couldn't refuse him outright. Not when he looked so desperate. "And what happens if I refuse?" she asked cautiously. Harold smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You won't refuse. You're loyal to me, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, my lord, I am." "Good," Harold said, standing up. He descended the steps until he was standing directly in front of her. For a brief second, she thought he might say more, explain why he chose her specifically. But instead, he simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "Do this for me, Clara, please," She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his request settle over her like a heavy cloak. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But I hope you know what you're doing." Harold nodded, though. His expression remained grim. "So do I." Later that evening, Clara found herself sitting alone in her quarters, staring at the wall. Her sword lay across the table in front of her, its blade gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Normally, she spent her evenings cleaning and sharpening her weapons, preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. But tonight, she couldn't focus. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation with Harold. Something about it didn't sit right with her. Yes, showing humility was important, especially for a leader. But why did it have to be her? Why did Harold pick her, of all people, to play this role? Was it because she was strong enough to pull it off convincingly? Or was it because he trusted her more than anyone else? Clara shook her head, trying to clear her mind. Speculating wouldn't help. What mattered now was getting through tomorrow. She needed to prepare herself mentally and physically for the duel. It wouldn't be easy, pretending to fight while holding back enough to avoid seriously injuring Harold. And yet, at the same time, she couldn't let it look fake. The crowd would see right through her if she hesitated too much. As she picked up her sword and began polishing it, Clara realized that this wasn't just another mission. This was personal. Whether she liked it or not, she was about to become part of something bigger, a gamble that could change the course of Veron forever. And as much as she wanted to deny it, a small part of her was curious to see how it would all unfold. Outside her window, the stars twinkled faintly in the dark sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of the castle, the people of Veron were going about their lives, unaware of what awaited them in the arena tomorrow. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Whatever happened next, she would face it, head on as she always did. The night stretched on, long and silent, as Clara prepared for the challenge ahead. Little did she know the duel would bring changes not just for the kingdom, but for her own soul as well. The morning of the duel arrived with an eerie calm. The sun rose slowly over Veron, casting long shadows across the land. Clara woke up early, her body tense with anticipation. She had barely slept the night before, her mind replaying the conversation with King Harold over and over again. Was this truly the right decision? Could she really go through with humiliating him in front of everyone? These questions haunted her as she dressed in her armor. Clara's armor was simple, but practical blackened steel plates that fit snugly against her frame, designed to protect without restricting movement. She polished it until it gleamed under the dim light of her quarters. Her sword, a finely crafted blade with a sharp edge, rested on the table beside her. She picked it up, testing its weight in her hand. It felt familiar, reassuring. But today, the weapon seemed heavier than usual, as if it carried the burden of what she was about to do before leaving her room. Clara took one last look at herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection stared back a woman, with sharp features, piercing gray eyes, and a jawline set in determination. She tried to imagine how others would see her during the duel, strong, confident, unstoppable. Yet inside, she felt anything but. For the first time in years, doubt crept into her thoughts. What if she made a mistake? What if Harold's gamble failed, and instead of earning loyalty, he lost everything? Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, King Harold was preparing for the day ahead. Unlike Clara, his preparations were less physical and more mental. He stood in front of a large window in his chambers, gazing out at the city below. From this height, he could see the sprawling streets of Veron, bustling with activity even. At dawn, merchants set up their stalls, children played near fountains, and workers hurried to their jobs. These were his people, the ones he swore to protect when he first took the throne. But lately, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. His grip on the kingdom wasn't loosening, exactly, but cracks were beginning to show. The whispers of rebellion weren't just idle gossip anymore. They were growing louder. And while he had always relied on strength and authority to keep order, he now realized that might not be enough. People wanted more from their ruler. They wanted connection, trust, humanity. That was why he had come up with this plan, risky, As it was, Harold turned away from the window and walked over to a chest at the foot of his bed. Inside lay the ceremonial armor he would wear for the duel. It was ornate, decorated with gold engravings and crimson accents, far removed from the practical gear soldiers usually wore. This armor was meant to impress, not to protect. As he lifted it out, he ran his fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the cool metal beneath his touch. It reminded him of all the ceremonies and battles he'd been through since becoming king. Each scratch and dent told a story, a reminder of the sacrifices he'd made. But today, the armor symbolized something else entirely: vulnerability. By stepping into the arena wearing it, Harold knew he was exposing himself, not just physically, but emotionally. He would stand before his people, stripped of the invincibility they associated with him. And though the thought terrified him, it also gave him a strange sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, this act of humility would bring them closer together. As the hours passed, excitement built throughout the kingdom. News of the duel had spread quickly, drawing crowds from every corner of Veron. By mid-morning, the arena was packed with spectators, their voices rising in a deafening roar. Flags bearing the royal crest fluttered in the breeze, and vendors sold food and drinks to eager attendees. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for a better view, while older citizens exchanged bets on who would win. Among the crowd were Harold's advisors and courtiers, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. Many of them thought the duel was a foolish idea, a reckless move that could undermine the king's authority. "Why does he insist on doing this?" muttered one of the nobles, shaking his head. "It makes no sense." Others, however, saw potential in the plan. They understood that sometimes leaders needed to take risks to maintain control. "If it works," said a younger advisor, "the people will love him even more. They'll see him as relatable, human." While the crowd buzzed with speculation, Clara waited in a secluded chamber near the arena. She sat on a wooden bench, her helmet resting beside her. Her hands gripped the hilt of her sword tightly, knuckles white. She tried to focus on her breathing, steadying herself for what was to come. But the noise outside kept intruding, reminding her of the thousands of eyes that would soon be watching her every move, Servant entered the room, carrying a tray of food and drink. "Your Majesty thought you might need sustenance before the duel," he said politely, placing the tray on a nearby table. Clara nodded in thanks, but didn't touch the food. She wasn't hungry. Instead, she closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to the countless battles she'd fought in the past. Those fights had been straightforward: kill or be killed. There had been no room for hesitation, no second-guessing. Today, she had to balance aggression with restraint, force with subtlety. It was a delicate dance, and one wrong step could ruin everything. Finally, the moment came. A trumpet sounded, signaling the start of the event. Clara stood up, strapping on her helmet and adjusting her armor one last time. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Outside, the roar of the crowd grew louder as the gates opened, revealing the arena bathed in sunlight. Clara stepped out first, her boots crunching against the gravel. The noise hit her like a tidal wave, cheers and shouts echoing off the stone walls. She scanned the crowd briefly, her gaze steady and unflinching. Then she turned her attention to the opposite side of the arena, where Harold stood waiting. Emerged moments later, his ceremonial armor gleaming in the bright light. The contrast between them was striking. Clara in her dark, battle-worn gear, and Harold in his elaborate, regal attire. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. Clara saw the same mix of fear and resolve in Harold's expression. That she felt within herself was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the stakes involved. Neither spoke as they moved to the center of the arena, where the referees stood ready to begin the duel. The rules were simple: fight until one opponent yielded or was unable to continue. Of course, both Clara and Harold knew this was no ordinary match. To the audience, it would appear as a fierce contest of skill and strength. In reality, it was a carefully choreographed performance designed to achieve a specific outcome. But even the best-laid plans could go awry. Clara couldn't help but wonder what might happen if things didn't go according to script. The referee raised his hand, signaling for silence. The crowd obeyed, their voices fading into a hushed murmur. "Begin," shouted, lowering his arm. With that single word, the duel began. At first, Clara held back, letting Harold make the initial moves. He swung his sword clumsily, clearly unaccustomed to wielding such a weapon in real combat. The crowd cheered anyway, mistaking his awkwardness for bravery. Clara countered each strike with precision, her movements fluid and calculated. She allowed herself to be pushed backward slightly, giving the illusion of struggle. The audience roared with approval, believing they were witnessing a true battle. But as the minutes ticked by, Clara noticed something unexpected. Harold wasn't playing along as much as she expected. He hesitated too often, leaving openings that any trained fighter would exploit. At first, she thought it was part of the act, a way to make himself look weaker. But then she saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands. He wasn't pretending he was genuinely afraid. This realization threw Clara off balance. She had prepared herself for a staged fight, not for genuine fear. And yet here was Harold standing before her, exposed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Part of her wanted to end the duel quickly, to spare him further humiliation.
But she
knew she couldn't. Not without risking the entire plan. So she pressed on, feigning aggression while still holding back enough to avoid serious harm. The crowd ate it up, cheering louder with every exchange. But Clara couldn't ignore the growing unease in her chest. Something about this felt wrong, deeper than she had imagined. Whether it was Harold's vulnerability or her own conflicted emotions, she couldn't say. All she knew was that this duel was changing her in ways she hadn't expected. And then, just as she thought she had everything under control, fate intervened. A misstep by Harold left him wide open, his guard completely down. Without thinking, Clara reacted instinctively, swinging her sword with practiced ease. The blade struck true, shattering the ornate armor covering Harold's chest. Metal shards flew in all directions as the king stumbled backward, falling to his knees. For a split second, the arena fell silent. Then chaos erupted. The silence in the arena was deafening, broken only by the sharp clatter of metal fragments hitting the ground. Clara froze, her sword still raised mid-strike, as she stared at Harold kneeling before her. The ornate chest plate of his ceremonial armor lay shattered, revealing the plain tunic underneath. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The crowd, which had been roaring with excitement just seconds earlier, now held its breath, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Harold's face was pale, but there was no pain in his expression, only relief. His blue eyes met Clara's gray ones, and for the first time since the duel began, he looked calm. It was as though the weight he had been carrying had finally lifted, replaced by something lighter, freer. The other hand felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from exertion, but from shock. She hadn't meant to strike so hard. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The referee stepped forward hesitantly, unsure whether to intervene or let the scene play out. "Your Majesty?" he called softly, his voice trembling. But Harold raised a hand, silencing him without. Looking away from Clara, "I'm fine," Harold said, his tone steady despite the circumstances. He pushed himself up slowly, wincing slightly as he straightened his posture. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some gasping in disbelief while others cheered, interpreting the blow as part of the spectacle. It was proof that even their mighty king could be humbled to display a vulnerability that resonated deeply. But Clara knew better. This wasn't part of the plan. As Harold stood there, exposed and unguarded, Clara lowered her sword. Her hands trembled slightly, though. She tried to hide it. She couldn't believe what she had done. All those years of training, all the battles she'd fought, and yet here she was, standing in front of the one person she swore to protect, and she had failed him, or had she?
Oh.
The look in Harold's eyes told her otherwise. There was gratitude. There mixed with something else she couldn't quite place. "Clara," Harold said, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the noise of the crowd. "It's all right." She shook her head, her throat tight with emotion. "No, it's not," she replied, her words barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't?" Harold assured her, taking a step closer. His voice grew firmer, more commanding, as if reminding both of them who he was. "This is exactly what needed to happen. You gave me what I asked for and more." Clara frowned, confused. Was he really saying that breaking his armor and nearly injuring him was part of his plan? She wanted to argue, to tell him how reckless and dangerous this entire idea had been. But before she could say anything, the crowd surged forward, cheering louder than ever. They were chanting Harold's name, their voices filled with admiration and newfound respect. Whatever doubts they might have harbored about their king seemed to vanish in an instant. Harold turned to face them, raising his arms in acknowledgement. The gesture was simple, yet powerful. It was as if he were embracing their judgment, accepting their cheers and jeers alike. Clara watched him carefully, noting the subtle change in his demeanor. Gone was the tense, calculating ruler who had summoned her the day before. In his place stood a man who had faced his fears, not just in front of his people, but within himself. When the noise began to die down, Harold signaled for quiet. The crowd obeyed, their attention fixed on him. "My people," he began, his voice echoing across the arena. "Today you have seen me humbled. You have seen that I am not invincible, that I am as human as any of you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But being human does not make us weak, it makes us strong. Together we can build a future where strength and humility walk hand in hand." The crowd erupted again, this time with applause so thunderous it drowned out everything else. Clara stood silently, watching as Harold basked in the adoration of his subjects. She couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, knowing that she had played a key role in this moment. Whether it was intentional or accidental, she had shattered more than just his armor. She had shattered the illusion of perfection that surrounded him, and perhaps, in doing so, she had helped him find something real. After the duel, the celebration spilled into the streets of Veron. People danced, sang, and toasted to their king, hailing him as a leader who understood their struggles. Inside the castle, however, the mood was quieter. Clara retreated to her quarters, unable to shake the unease lingering in her mind. She removed her armor piece by piece, setting each item aside with deliberate care. Her movements were slow, almost mechanical, as if trying to delay the inevitable confrontation with herself. What had happened in the arena weighed heavily on her conscience. She replayed the moment over and over in her head, the misstep, the strike, the shattering of Harold's armor. Had she acted out of instinct? Or had there been something deeper driving her actions? She couldn't deny that part of her had wanted to test Harold, to see if he truly believed in his own plan. And when he faltered, leaving himself open, she had seized the opportunity without thinking. But why? Why hadn't she held back completely as she had promised? Clara sank onto the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. Was it because she doubted him? Or was it because she doubted herself? Thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Startled, she stood up and opened it to find Harold standing there. He looked tired but composed, his golden crown glinting faintly in the dim light of the corridor. "May I come in?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Clara nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. She closed the door behind him, feeling the tension in the air grow thicker. Neither of them spoke for a moment, the silence stretching between them like an invisible barrier. Finally, Harold broke it. "You don't need to apologize," he said, turning to face her. "What happened today? It was necessary." Clara crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "Necessary? Breaking your armor wasn't part of the plan?" "Harold, I went too far," maybe, Harold admitted, taking a step closer. "But sometimes going too far is the only way to get things right. Do you think I didn't know the risks involved? I chose you for this task because I trust you. Clara, because I knew you wouldn't hold back even if it meant challenging me." His words struck a chord deep within her. Clara looked away, unsure of how to respond. She had always prided herself on her discipline, her ability to follow orders without question. Yet today she had questioned everything, including her own loyalty. And now Harold was telling her that her doubts, her instincts, had been exactly what he needed. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said finally, her voice soft but sincere. If I had known, you did what you had to do, Harold interrupted gently. And because of that, my people saw me for who I really am, not a perfect ruler, but a flawed human being. That's worth more than any victory in battle. Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. She wanted to believe him, to accept that everything had worked out for the best. But the memory of that single strike lingered in her mind, a reminder of how easily control could slip away. I hope you're right, she murmured. Harold smiled faintly, placing a hand on her shoulder. So do I. They stood there for a moment, two figures bound by duty and trust, sharing a quiet understanding. Though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew that the events of the day had changed them. For Harold, it was a chance to reconnect with his humanity. For Clara, it was a lesson in letting go of perfection and embracing imperfection. Just in others, but in herself. As Harold left her quarters, Clara sat back down on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Outside, the sounds of celebration continued, filling the night with laughter and music. But inside, she felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, she had done the right thing after all. The days following the duel were unlike anything Varen had seen in years. The kingdom buzzed with energy, as if a storm cloud that had hung over it for so long had finally broken. People talked about the event everywhere in markets, taverns, and even in quiet corners of homes. They spoke of King Harold's bravery, his humility, and how he had willingly allowed himself to be humbled by one of his own warriors. To many, it was proof that their ruler wasn't just a distant figure on a throne, but a man who understood their struggles. For Clara, however, the aftermath brought a mix of relief and unease. Clara avoided the celebrations, while the rest of the kingdom rejoiced. She stayed in her quarters or wandered the quieter parts of the castle. She couldn't bring herself to join the festivities, not when guilt still gnawed at her insides. Every time someone mentioned the duel, she felt a pang of regret. Breaking Harold's armor hadn't been part of the plan, no matter what he said. She replayed the moment in her mind, constantly the hesitation, the strike, the shattering sound that seemed to echo endlessly. It haunted her, not because she feared punishment, but because she doubted whether she had done the right thing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara found herself standing on the castle balcony. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. Below, the city lights twinkled like scattered stars, illuminating streets filled with laughter and music. She leaned against the railing, watching the scene unfold without truly seeing it. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on Harold, on the duel, on everything that had changed since that day. "You're avoiding me," a voice said behind her, startling her out of her reverie. Clara turned to see Harold approaching, his expression calm but curious. He wore simple clothes instead of his royal robes, making him look less like a king and more like an ordinary man. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Harold chuckled softly, stepping closer to lean against the railing beside her. "You've been hiding in your quarters for days? You didn't attend the feast last night, and I haven't seen you at any of the gatherings. That's not avoiding me? Then what is it?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how to explain herself. "It's not about avoiding you," she said after a pause. "It's complicated." Harold nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant skyline. "Complicated how?" She sighed, gripping the railing tighter. "I keep thinking about what happened in the arena, about the strike. Didn't mean to go that far, Harold. I should have held back completely, just like we agreed. Instead," her voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken guilt. Harold listened quietly, letting her speak without interruption. When she fell silent, he turned to face her, his blue eyes steady. "And kind, Clara," he said gently. "You think too much. What's done is done. And honestly, I don't regret a single moment of it." "But you could have been hurt," she insisted, her tone sharper than she intended. "What if I had injured you? What if you hadn't?" Interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "What if you had held back completely, like you thought I wanted? Do you really believe that would have worked? That my people would have seen me as humble if the duel looked fake?" Clara opened her mouth to argue but closed it again. She knew he was right. A staged fight might have fooled some, but others would have seen through it. The authenticity of the moment, the way Harold had stumbled, the crack of his armor breaking, was what made it resonate so deeply with the crowd. Still, that didn't erase the weight of her actions, I guess. She admitted reluctantly, but it doesn't make me feel better about it. Harold smiled faintly, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. You're too hard on yourself, Clara. You always have been. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks even if they scare you. His words struck a chord within her, stirring emotions she had buried long ago. Clara had spent years building walls around herself, using discipline and duty as shields against vulnerability. But now, those walls felt weaker, cracked open by the events of the past few days. She glanced at Harold, seeing not just a king, but a man who carried burdens similar to hers. Both of them had sacrificed pieces of themselves for the sake of others. Both of them had struggled to balance strength with humanity. Why did you pick me? She asked suddenly, her voice softer this time. Out of everyone, why did you choose me to do this? Harold tilted his head, considering the question. Because I trust you, he said simply. Not just as a warrior, but as a person. Knew you wouldn't hesitate to challenge me, even if it meant going against orders. And deep down, I needed that. I needed someone who wouldn't treat me like a king, but like a human being. Clara blinked, surprised by his honesty. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, least of all, someone in power. It made her realize how rare genuine trust was, especially in a world where loyalty often came with strings attached. The first time in years, she felt seen not as a tool or a weapon, but as a person with flaws and fears. Over the next few weeks, life in Veron began to settle into a new rhythm. The rebellion whispers faded, replaced by renewed hope and unity among the people. Harold noticed the change immediately. Subjects greeted him with smiles instead of wary glances. Petitions to the throne focused less on grievances and more on ideas for improving the kingdom. It was as if the duel had bridged the gap between ruler and ruled, creating a bond that hadn't existed before. For Clara, things were different too. Though she continued her duties as a warrior, her role expanded beyond combat. Harold started, inviting her to council meetings, seeking her input on matters ranging from military strategy to diplomacy. At first, she hesitated, unsure of whether her opinions mattered in such settings. But Harold encouraged her, reminding her that her perspective was valuable precisely because she saw the world differently from the nobles and advisors who surrounded him. Their relationship grew stronger as well. What had once been strictly professional evolved into something deeper, a friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. They spent hours talking late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts and discussing their hopes for the future. Clara learned about Harold's childhood, how he had grown up in the shadow of his father's tyranny and vowed to rule differently. In turn, she opened up about her own losses, revealing glimpses of the pain she had kept hidden for so long. Through these conversations, Clara discovered that Harold wasn't just a leader, he was a dreamer. Beneath his stoic exterior lay a man who believed in a better world, one where strength and compassion coexisted. And as she listened to him speak, she realized that maybe she shared that belief too. One afternoon, while walking through the castle gardens, Clara stopped to admire a cluster of wildflowers growing near the fountain. Their vibrant colors stood out against the gray stone, a reminder of beauty thriving in unexpected places. Harold joined her moments later, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her, nodding toward the flowers. They remind me of you, he said casually, sipping. From his cup, Clara raised an eyebrow, amused. Me? How? They're resilient, Harold explained, gesturing to the blooms. They grow in harsh conditions, enduring storms and heat. But they're also delicate, full of life and color, just like you. Clara laughed, shaking her head. You're reading too much into flowers, Harold, maybe he admitted with a grin. But sometimes, the simplest things hold the most meaning. As they stood there together, sipping tea and enjoying the peaceful moment, Clara felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The guilt that had weighed her down after the duel was still present, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, it reminded her of the lessons she had learned that mistakes could lead to growth. That vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that trust, when given freely, could change everything. In the distance, the city of Veron thrived under its renewed spirit, its people united by a shared vision of hope. And within the castle walls, two souls bound by duty discovered something far greater: the courage to embrace imperfection and the freedom that came with it. Months passed, and Veron continued to flourish under the new sense of unity that had taken root after the duel. The kingdom felt different, lighter, as if a heavy fog had lifted. People went about their lives with renewed purpose, working together to rebuild what years of unrest had damaged. Fields once left barren were now sown with crops, roads repaired, and trade routes reopened. Even the air seemed cleaner, carrying whispers of optimism instead of fear. King Harold's gamble had paid off, and his people responded by giving him their loyalty, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. For Clara, life took on a rhythm she hadn't known in years. Her days were no longer just about training or fighting. They included council meetings, strategy sessions, and even occasional trips to the outer villages to assess the kingdom's progress. At first, these responsibilities intimidated her. She wasn't used to being part of decision-making processes, let alone offering advice to a king. But Harold insisted, often reminding her that her perspective was invaluable because it came from someone who understood both battlefields and the struggles of ordinary people. "You see things others don't," Harold told her one evening during a quiet dinner in the castle hall. "You've walked among soldiers, farmers, and merchants. You know what matters most to them?" Clara nodded, though she still doubted herself sometimes. It was strange to think that her opinions carried weight in matters beyond combat. Yet over time, she grew more confident, learning to voice her thoughts without hesitation. And when her suggestions led to positive changes, like improved supply lines for remote villages or better living conditions for soldiers stationed at the borders, she began to believe that maybe she truly did belong in this role. Despite the progress, not everything was perfect. There were still challenges, of course. Some nobles resented Harold's growing reliance on Clara, viewing her inclusion in council meetings as an insult to tradition. They whispered behind closed doors, questioning why a warrior should have any say in governance. Others simply dismissed her contributions, assuming she lacked the education or experience to understand complex issues. Clara heard the murmurs, but chose to ignore them. She knew proving herself wouldn't happen overnight, especially to those who clung to outdated ideas about class and status. Instead, she focused on doing her job well, letting her actions speak louder than words. Over time, even the skeptics began to soften, grudgingly acknowledging her value when her strategies yielded results. Still, the tension between old ways and new thinking lingered, a reminder that change rarely came without resistance. Harold noticed the strain it put on Clara. He saw how she carried herself differently around the courtiers, her posture stiffening whenever someone challenged her authority. One day, as they walked through the castle corridors, he stopped her gently. "Don't let them get to you," he said, his tone firm yet kind. "Their opinions don't define you." "No," Clara replied, though her expression betrayed her frustration. "But it's hard not to care when they question everything I do." "Let them question," Harold countered. "It means you're making waves. Trust me, stagnation is far worse than criticism." Clara smiled faintly, appreciating his attempt to reassure her. Deep down, she knew he was right. Change required pushing boundaries, and pushing boundaries inevitably invited pushback. Still, it wasn't easy to shake off years of conditioning, to stop caring about what others thought of her. But with Harold's support and her own determination, she kept moving forward. As the seasons changed, so did the bond between Clara and Harold. Their friendship deepened, evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. Late-night conversations became a regular occurrence, often lasting until dawn. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their fears, their dreams for the future. Harold shared stories of his father, a harsh ruler who valued power above all else. I swore I'd be different, he confessed one night, staring into the fire. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm failing. You're not failing, Clara said firmly, leaning forward to meet his gaze. Look at what you've done for Veron. Look at how your people see you now. Harold sighed, rubbing his temples. It's not just about being seen, Clara. It's about being remembered. When my reign ends, I want people to say I made a difference, not just maintained the status quo. Clara hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had never considered legacy before. For her, survival had always been enough. But listening to Harold made her realize that perhaps there was more to life than enduring hardships. Maybe it was possible to leave something meaningful behind, something that outlasted the battles fought along the way. What do you want to be remembered for? She asked finally, her voice soft. Harold thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. In concentration, kindness, he said at last. It's not weakness, but true kindness. It's the kind that inspires others to do better, to be better. Clara nodded slowly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She had spent years believing kindness was a luxury she couldn't afford, that showing compassion would make her vulnerable. But seeing Harold embrace it, despite the risks, made her question whether she had been wrong all along. One afternoon, while visiting a village near the kingdom's border, Clara witnessed firsthand the impact of Harold's vision. Greeted her warmly, eager to share stories of how life had improved since the duel. A farmer showed her his newly planted fields, explaining how supplies delivered by royal caravans had saved his family from starvation. A blacksmith proudly displayed weapons crafted for local guards thanks to funding approved by the council. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of hope taking root. Later that evening, as she sat by a campfire with Harold, she recounted what she had seen. They're thriving, she said, her voice filled with awe. The duel didn't just change how they see you, it changed how they see themselves. They believe in a better future now. Harold listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. That's what I wanted, he admitted. Not just loyalty, but belief. Belief that we can build something lasting together. You already have, Clara said, smiling, and it's beautiful. The compliment caught Harold off guard, and he chuckled softly. Coming from you, that means a lot. Clara shrugged, though her cheeks flushed slightly. I'm just saying what's true. Their eyes met across the fire, and for a moment, neither spoke. The connection between them had grown stronger over the months, transcending roles and titles. They weren't just king and warrior anymore. They were partners, allies, friends.
Ow.
And though neither voiced it aloud, they both felt the shift. Subtle, yet undeniable. Back at the castle, life resumed its usual pace. But the changes wrought by the duel continued to ripple outward. Clara found herself mentoring younger warriors, teaching them not only how to fight, but also how to lead with integrity. She emphasized the importance of empathy, urging them to remember that every decision affected real people. Strength isn't just about winning battles, she told them during one session. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Her words resonated with many of the recruits who admired her not just for her skill, but for her wisdom. A new generation of leaders began to emerge, shaped by her guidance and Harold's vision. Together, they laid the foundation for a brighter future. One built on trust and collaboration, rather than fear and control. Even the courtiers who had once doubted. Clara started to warm up to her presence. Some approached her privately, seeking advice on military matters or asking for help mediating disputes. Others simply acknowledged her contributions openly, praising her for her dedication to the kingdom. Though Clara remained wary of flattery, she appreciated the gesture. Seeing it as proof that walls could crumble, even the ones built by pride. By the end of the year, Veron stood stronger than ever, its people united, its economy thriving, and its defenses secure. But for Clara and Harold, the greatest victory wasn't external, it was internal. Through their shared journey, they had discovered something profound, that leadership wasn't about perfection, but about growth. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it head-on. And that trust, when nurtured, could transform even the most fractured relationships into bonds unbreakable by time or circumstance. As winter settled over the land, blanketing the kingdom in snow, Clara stood on the castle balcony, gazing at the city below. Lights twinkled in the distance, casting a warm glow against the cold night. Behind her, Harold joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice barely audible over the wind. "For what?" Clara asked, turning to look at him. "For reminding me of who I am," Harold replied, his eyes shining with gratitude. "For helping me find my humanity again." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, despite the chill in the air. "We found it together," she said softly, "and I think we're better for it." Harold nodded, his expression peaceful. Together they stood side by side, watching as the kingdom they had worked so hard to heal continued to shine brightly beneath the stars. The years rolled on, and Veron entered a golden age. The changes that had begun with the duel continued to shape the kingdom, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Fields once barren were now lush with crops, villages once isolated thrived. With trade and roads once dangerous became safe for travelers, people spoke of King Harold not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of hope, a leader who had dared to show weakness and weakness. In doing so, inspired strength in others. Clara's role evolved alongside the kingdom. She was no longer just a warrior. She had become a cornerstone of Harold's reign. Her advice guided decisions both large and small, from military strategies to policies aimed at improving daily life. Yet despite her growing influence, Clara remained humble. She never sought recognition or glory, preferring instead to work quietly behind the scenes. To her, the real reward wasn't famite, was seeing the tangible results of their efforts. Happy faces in the marketplaces, children playing safely in the streets, and soldiers returning home to their families after peaceful patrols. Harold often marveled at how much Clara had grown since the day he summoned her to the throne room. Back then, she had been a solitary figure, hardened by years of loss and battle. Now, she was someone entirely different, someone who smiled more, laughed freely, and carried herself with quiet confidence. He knew he couldn't take all the credit for her transformation, but he liked to think that their friendship had played a part. After all, they had helped each other heal in ways neither had expected. One evening, as spring returned to Veron, Clara found herself sitting alone in the castle gardens. The air was warm, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. She leaned back against a stone bench, closing her eyes and letting the sounds of nature wash over her, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds, the gentle hum of insects. It was moments like these that reminded her how far she had come. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to the woman she used to be. That version of herself seemed almost foreign now, a shadow eclipsed by the light of new beginnings. She remembered the nights spent restless, questioning whether she had done the right thing during the duel. Those doubts had faded over time, replaced by clarity. The strike that shattered Harold's armor hadn't been a mistake, it had been a turning point. Not just for him, but for her too. It had forced her to confront her own fears and insecurities, to let go of the walls she had built around herself. "Penny, for your thoughts?" a familiar voice asked, pulling her out of her reverie. Clara opened her eyes to see Harold standing nearby, holding 2 glasses of wine. He smiled warmly, extending one toward her. "You look deep in thought." He was, Clara admitted, accepting the glass. She's thinking about how much has changed. Harold sat beside her, sipping his drink. "For better or worse?" "For better," Clara replied without hesitation. "I never imagined I'd end up here helping you run a kingdom, mentoring warriors, making decisions that affect thousands of lives, but somehow it feels right." Harold nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever miss the old days? The simplicity of being a soldier?" Clara hesitated before answering. "Sometimes there's something comforting about knowing exactly what's expected of you, about having clear rules to follow. But I don't think I could go back to that life, not after everything we've built together." Harold smiled faintly, raising his glass in a silent toast. Two, building something lasting then. Too lasting, Clara echoed, clinking her glass against his. They sat in companionable silence for a while, enjoying the tranquility of the evening. For Clara, these moments were precious. In the chaos of ruling a kingdom, it was easy to lose sight of the simple joys, like sharing a drink with a friend under the stars. She glanced at Harold, noting the lines on his face that hadn't been there when they first met. Time had aged him, but it had also softened him, making him wiser and kinder. "You've changed, you know," Clara said suddenly, breaking the silence. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Changed how?" "Lighter," Clara explained, searching for the right words. "Less burdened. Like you finally let go of whatever was weighing you down." Harold chuckled softly, looking down at his hands. "Maybe I have. Or maybe I've just learned to carry it differently. You taught me that, Clara. You showed me that strength isn't about pushing through pain. It's about finding peace within." Clara shook her head, embarrassed by the praise. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," Harold insisted, his tone firm. "You reminded me of who I wanted to be. And not just me, you've done the same for everyone around you. The recruits look up to you. The villagers trust you. Even the courtiers respect you, though they'll never admit it." Clara laughed, rolling her eyes. "Let's not get carried away. I'm serious," Harold said, leaning forward slightly. "You've made this kingdom better not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. Strength, compassion, integrity, they're rare qualities, especially in someone who's seen as much darkness as you have." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat, overwhelmed by his words. She had always believed that her value lay in her actions, in what she could contribute to the world. But hearing Harold describe her character, her essence, made her realize that perhaps she was worth more than she had ever allowed herself to believe. As the seasons passed, Clara began to think about her future. She was getting older, and though she still trained regularly, she knew her body wouldn't keep up forever. The idea of stepping back from active duty scared her at first. What would she do if she wasn't fighting or leading soldiers? Harold encouraged her to explore other paths, reminding her that her skills extended beyond combat. "You've already started training the next generation," Harold pointed out one day. "Why not focus on that? Leave the battles to the younger ones, and use your experience to guide them." Clara considered his suggestion, realizing it made sense. Over the years, she had taken several recruits under her wing, teaching them not just how to wield swords, but how to lead with honor and empathy. Watching them grow into capable leaders filled her with pride. She knew she could continue making a difference even without picking up a weapon. With Harold's support, Clara transitioned into a mentorship role, dedicating her time to shaping the future of Veron's warriors. She traveled to training camps across the kingdom, sharing her knowledge and instilling values of discipline, teamwork, and compassion. Her reputation preceded her, and many young fighters eagerly sought her guidance, eager to learn from the legendary warrior who had once humbled their king. Despite her shifting responsibilities, Clara remained close to Harold. Their bond had only grown stronger over the years, evolving into something neither could fully define. They weren't lovers, though rumors occasionally circulated, but their connection went deeper than friendship. They were partners in every sense of the word, united by shared experiences and mutual respect. On Harold's birthday one year, Clara surprised him with a gift, a small wooden carving of a phoenix rising from ashes. It was simple yet meaningful, symbolizing resilience and rebirth. Harold stared at it for a long moment, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I made it," Clara admitted, shrugging modestly. "It's not perfect, but I thought it suited you." Harold smiled, placing the carving carefully on his desk. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Thank you." Later that night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city, Harold turned to Clara. "Do you ever wonder? What would have happened if I hadn't asked you to humiliate me that day?" "All the time," Clara replied honestly. But I think things worked out the way they were supposed to. We needed each other, even if we didn't realize it then." Harold nodded, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I'm glad fate brought us together." "Me too," Clara said, smiling faintly. They stood there for a while watching as the stars emerged one by one, painting the sky with pinpricks of light. Below them, the city of Veron glowed brightly, its people living lives, shaped by the choices Clara and Harold had made. Together they had transformed a fractured kingdom into a beacon of hope in doing so. They had rediscovered pieces of themselves, long thought lost. In the end, it wasn't titles or achievements that defined them. It was the courage to embrace imperfection, the willingness to trust each other, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world. As they stood side by side, bathed in moonlight, Clara and Harold knew one thing for certain. Their journey was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as equals, as friends, and as partners in the ongoing story of Veron.